Chapter 1, The Hero with the Headache. The first thing Cedric knew was pain. It wasn't the sharp, clean pain of a bludger to the ribs or a miscast spell in the dueling club. This was a thick, syrupy ache that coated the inside of his skull, pressing against his eyeballs from behind. It pulsed in time with a muffled, rhythmic thudding that he vaguely recognized as his own heartbeat. He tried to open his eyes. The light was a physical assault, a blade of brilliant white that sent a fresh wave of agony through his head. He squeezed them shut again with a groan, the sound rusty and foreign in his own throat. "Ah, Mr. Diggory. Welcome back." The voice was brisk, familiar. "Madame Pomfrey. Don't try to sit up just yet. You've had quite the ordeal." Cedric forced his eyelids to part, blinking through the glare until the high, arched ceiling of the hospital wing swam into focus. The air smelled of dittany and starched linen. He was in his usual bed, the 1/3 from the end, which he'd occupied twice before, once for a Quidditch-related broken wrist and once after an unfortunate incident with a famed geranium in herbology. This felt different. Deeper. "What?" he managed, his tongue feeling thick and clumsy. "You're at Hogwarts," Madame Pomfrey said, her sharp face softening with a rare, almost maternal look. She held a small vial of lavender-colored potion to his lips. "Drink this. It'll help with the after effects." He drank without question. It tasted like cool mint and forgetting. The throbbing in his head receded from a roar to a dull hum. He could think again, sort of. He tried to sit up, his muscles protesting weakly. "The tournament," he said, the words coming more easily now. "The third task. The maze." Memories flickered, disjointed but present. The rustle of the high hedges. The unsettling silence. The blast-ended scrut, smelling of burnt fish. The golden gleam of the Triwizard Cup in the center of the maze. He remembered seeing Harry, his face smudged with dirt and determination. He remembered their argument, the brief, ridiculous moment of Hufflepuff Gryffindor politeness over who should take the cup. "We took it together," Cedric said, his voice gaining confidence. "The cup, it was a portkey." "Yes, Mr. Diggory," Madame Pomfrey confirmed, fluffing his pillow with practiced efficiency. "It was." He remembered the lurch behind his navel, the dizzying spin of color and sound. Then, nothing. A void. A perfectly smooth, black, 5-minute shaped hole in his memory. It wasn't just fuzzy, it was gone, as if a page had been ripped from the book of his mind with surgical precision. The next thing he remembered was a cacophony of panicked shouts, the floodlights of the Quidditch pitch, and Dumbledore's grim face leaning over him. "What happened?" he asked, his heart starting to beat a little faster. "In the graveyard? That's where we landed, wasn't it?" "I remember, grass under my hands." Madame Pomfrey pursed her lips. "Albus will want to speak with you about that. The important thing is, you're safe. Both you and Mr. Potter. You were incredibly brave." "Brave?" The word felt wrong, like a cloak several sizes too large. He didn't feel brave. He felt like he'd blinked and missed the most important part of a story. Before he could press her for more details, the doors to the hospital wing burst open with a resounding bang. "My boy. My son." Amos Diggory strode into the room, his ministry robes askew and his face a mess of tears and ecstatic pride. He rushed to Cedric's bedside, grabbing his son's hand in a grip that was both painfully tight and trembling. "Cedric. They told me you were awake. A hero. The hero of Hogwarts," his father boomed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You faced him. You stood your ground against you-know-who himself and you came back. You and Potter both." Cedric stared at his father, the words washing over him without sinking in. "You know who?" "Voldemort." The name sent a phantom chill down his spine, an instinctive fear that had no memory to anchor it. He remembered Harry screaming the name on the pitch, but the context was missing. "I did?" he asked, the question sounding feeble even to his own ears. "Did?" Amos laughed, a great, booming sound of relief. "You stood between him and Harry. fought off a Death Eater. Defended yourself against the Dark Lord. That's what Potter told everyone. It's what Fudge is telling the Prophet right now. Oh, the letters we've been getting, said. You wouldn't believe it. Offers from the Tutchill Tornadoes, a lifetime supply of Sleekeasy's hair potion, a marriage proposal from that Vila girl from Beaux Batons. Cedric felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with his head injury. He tried to pull his hand away, but his father's grip was iron. He was supposed to be a hero. He was supposed to remember fighting, dueling, being brave. But all he had was a 5-minute blank and the ghost of a high, cold laugh that made the hairs on his arms stand up. He looked past his father, searching for an explanation, and saw Harry Potter standing hesitantly by the door. Harry looked terrible. Worse than Cedric had ever seen him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his expression was a haunted, hollowed-out thing. He wasn't looking at Cedric with admiration, he was looking at him with a mixture of guilt and pity that made Cedric's stomach clench. Their eyes met. In that single, silent glance, Cedric saw the chasm between the Ministry's story and the truth. Harry knew what had happened in that 5-minute gap. And whatever it was, it hadn't been heroic. It had been horrifying. Amos, oblivious, finally released Cedric's hand to clap him on the shoulder. Rest up, son. The minister himself is coming to see you this afternoon. Wants to award you the Order of Merlin, first class. Can you believe it? First class. Cedric couldn't speak. He just watched as his father, beaming with a pride Cedric hadn't earned, finally swept out of the ward, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. Harry lingered for a moment longer, his mouth opening as if to say something, before he shook his head and disappeared, the door closing with a soft click. Left alone in the sterile quiet, Cedric sank back against his pillows. An imposter. That's what he was. A fraud in a hero's hospital bed. He had always been the boy who did things right. He studied hard, practiced Quidditch relentlessly, and treated people with kindness because it was the proper way to behave. His successes were built on a foundation of effort and fairness. This was different. This was unearned. It felt like being praised for winning a race he didn't remember running. He closed his eyes and tried to force the memory. Asterisk the maze. The acromantula. The Sphinx. The cup asterisk. The dizzying pull of the portkey. Asterisk the damp, cold ground. The smell of upturned earth and yew trees asterisk. A cauldron, vast and black, steaming over a fire. A high, cold voice speaking a language he didn't understand. Then, a flash. Not a memory, but a sensory echo. A blinding, sickening green light. The sound of a body hitting the ground with a soft, final thud. A scream, Harry's scream. And then, nothing. The blankness. The void. He must have been hit by a curse. Something that stunned him, scrambled his mind. The killing curse was green, wasn't it? He'd read about it. A jet of green light. But if he'd been hit by the killing curse, he'd be dead. He wasn't dead. He was just broken. A quiet clearing of a throat brought him back to the present. Albus Dumbledore stood at the foot of his bed, his half-moon spectacles perched on his long, crooked nose. His expression wasn't triumphant or proud like his father's, it was weary, ancient, and deeply sad. A trying experience, by all accounts, Dumbledore said, his voice calm and low. Cedric swallowed, grateful for the headmaster's tranquil presence. Professor, my father said. Harry said, that I fought him. Harry has told us what he saw, Dumbledore corrected gently. And in the chaos of the moment, what a person sees and what truly happens can be two very different things. How is your head? It aches, Cedric admitted. And there's a piece missing. After we arrived in the graveyard. Dumbledore nodded slowly, his long silver beard brushing against his star-spangled robes. Memory is a curious and fragile thing, Cedric. It can be damaged. It can be altered. And sometimes, it can be hidden away by the mind itself, as a form of protection. Protection from what? The truth, perhaps, Dumbledore said, his blue eyes holding Cedric's gaze with an unnerving intensity. The truth can be a heavy burden. Especially when so many powerful people would prefer a more comfortable story. The headmaster's words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. A more comfortable story, the story of the two Hogwarts champions, standing together against evil. The story of Cedric Diggory, the brave Hufflepuff hero. The story the minister was telling the prophet. I don't want a comfortable story, Cedric said, a flicker of his old self, the fair, honest Hufflepuff, surfacing through the fog of confusion. I want to know what happened. And so you shall, Dumbledore promised. In time. For now, your priority is to heal. The mind, much like a bone, must be given time to knit itself back together. Be patient with yourself, Cedric. Dumbledore placed a long-fingered hand on the bedpost. You will find yourself under a great deal of pressure in the coming days. People will want you to be a symbol. A beacon of hope. A testament to the ministry's narrative that all is well. His eyes twinkled, but there was no humor in them. It will be up to you to decide whether you are their symbol, or your own man. With that cryptic piece of advice, the headmaster turned and swept from the room, leaving Cedric with more questions than answers. Their symbol, the words echoed the unease coiling in his gut. Later that afternoon, after a tasteless lunch and another dose of the mint-flavored potion, a flustered-looking house elf appeared at his bedside with a pop, levitating an enormous, teetering pile of parchment and packages. Mail for the hero, Mr. Diggory, sir, the elf squeaked, bowing so low its nose touched the floor before depositing the mountain of correspondence on the adjacent bed and vanishing. Cedric stared at it. There had to be over 100 letters. Several brightly colored packages were tied with ribbon, and a squat, scarlet envelope at the top of the pile was already beginning to smoke faintly at the corners. A howler. With a sigh, he reached for it. Perhaps it was from a disgruntled Slytherin, angry that Hogwarts had won. That, at least, would feel normal. He slit the seal with his thumbnail, and it immediately shrieked to life in the booming, amplified voice of a middle-aged witch. Cedric Diggory, you magnificent, brave, wonderful boy. My daughter Ethel hasn't stopped talking about you for a week. She's cut out your picture from the prophet and taped it to her ceiling. We are so proud to have a true hero like you defending our world. If you're ever in Upper Flagley, do pop round for a scone. The howler ripped itself to shreds, showering his blankets in red confetti. Cedric stared at the mess, his face burning. He gingerly picked up another letter, this one written on expensive, cream-colored parchment. Dear Mr. Diggory. Asterisk on behalf of the committee for the annual Witch Weekly Most Charming Smile Award, we are delighted to inform you that you have won this year's prize by an unprecedented landslide victory. Your heroic stance against he who must not be named has proven that courage is the most charming attribute of all, asterisk. He dropped the letter as if it were cursed. This was a nightmare. A surreal, public nightmare where he was the star of a play for which he'd forgotten all his lines. He was Cedric Diggory, the finder, the fair player, the boy who worked hard for his grades. He wasn't Cedric Diggory, the slayer of darkness and winner of Charming Smile Awards. That person didn't exist. He was just about to push the entire pile of mail onto the floor when a sharp, precise rap sounded at the door. It wasn't the hurried knock of a student or the confident stride of a professor. It was a neat, almost bird-like tapping. Come in, he called out, his voice hoarse. The door opened to reveal a short, stout woman who looked as though she'd been squeezed into a set of fluffy, violently pink robes. She had a face like a pale toad, with wide, poachy eyes and a broad, slack mouth that was currently stretched into a syrupy sweet smile. A black velvet bow was perched atop her curly, mouse-brown hair like an unfortunate fly. Mr. Diggory, she said, her voice high-pitched and girlish, utterly at odds with her appearance. What a pleasure. I am Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic. She trotted to his bedside, her stubby little feet taking quick, unnervingly silent steps on the flagstone floor. A waft of cloying, lily-scented perfume followed her. The minister sends his deepest regards, she cooed, her wide eyes roving over him, not with concern, but with a strange, proprietary assessment, as if he were a piece of furniture she was considering for purchase. He is so very, very proud of the example you've set. Cedric shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure I set any example, ma'am. His voice trailed off. He didn't know what he had done. Nonsense, Umbridge chirped, dismissing his uncertainty with a little wave of her hand. Her fingers were short and stubby, adorned with several gaudy rings. You were brave. You were steadfast. You stood with another student and came back to tell the tale. A tale of a tragic, unfortunate accident that claimed the Triwizard Cup's glory. Cedric frowned. Accident? But Harry said Voldemort was there. Umbridge's smile tightened, just for a fraction of a second. Dear Mr. Potter has been through a terrible shock. He is confused. Muddled. It's why your account, the account of a clear-headed, reliable, and exceptionally popular student, is so vitally important. She leaned in closer, her sickly sweet perfume making his head spin. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which were cold and calculating. The ministry needs a hero, Mr. Diggory, she whispered, her voice losing its girlish lilt and taking on a hard, businesslike edge. It needs a face to reassure the public that everything is under control. That our children are safe at Hogwarts. A handsome, popular, pure-blood face. She straightened up, her smile returning full force. And we've decided that face is going to be yours.
#### Chapter 2, Pink Poison and a Pact in the Orrery. The Hufflepuff common room was supposed to be a sanctuary. It was a round, earthy room, perpetually bathed in the warm, honeyed light that filtered through its low, circular windows. The air smelled of polished wood, damp soil from the potted plants, and something vaguely like fresh baking. It was the architectural equivalent of a hug, welcoming, unassuming, and safe. For Cedric, who had spent the past week dodging reporters disguised as decorative suits of armor and fending off congratulatory backpats that felt more like accusations, it was the only place he could breathe. He was sunk into a squashy yellow armchair near the fireplace, a thick charms textbook open on his lap. He hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Instead, he was tracing the grain of the book's leather cover, trying to anchor himself to something solid, something real. The ministry's official narrative, that he and Harry had valiantly dueled the Dark Lord to a standstill before cleverly escaping, felt like a borrowed cloak, 3 sizes too large and itching uncomfortably at the neck. He was a hero in a story he couldn't remember reading. A soft, polite cough, as delicate and out of place as a porcelain teacup in a potions cauldron, shattered the room's peaceful hum. Hem. Cedric looked up. Standing in the tunnel-like entrance to the common room was a short, squat woman who seemed to be composed entirely of pink tweed and self-satisfaction. Her face, broad and flabby, was fixed in a smile that didn't reach her wide, toad-like eyes. A black velvet bow was perched atop her mousy brown hair like a startled bat. Cedric had never seen her before, but he felt an instinctive urge to check if his wand was within reach. Mr. Diggory, she asked, her voice a girlish, honey-sweet whisper that grated on the nerves. I am Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic. Might I have a moment of your time? She didn't wait for an answer, her stubby legs carrying her into the room with a sense of indomitable purpose. Her stout, heeled shoes clicked decisively on the flagstones. A few younger Hufflepuffs, who had been quietly playing Exploding Snap, fell silent, their eyes wide. Umbridge radiated an authority that was both absolute and deeply unsettling. She settled herself into the armchair opposite Cedric, her back ramrod straight, her stubby-fingered hands clasped neatly in her lap. The scent of cloying, artificial lilies wafted from her, a sickly sweet cloud in the earthy air. I must first say, on behalf of the minister himself, she began, her smile widening fractionally, what a tremendous relief it is to see you looking so well. Your recovery is a testament to your strength. A true beacon of hope for us all. Cedric shifted uncomfortably. Thank you, Madam Umbridge. I'm just glad to be, well, back. Oh, back is such a modest word, she tittered. You have returned, Mr. Diggory. A victor. A hero. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. And that is precisely why I am here. The Ministry believes you have a very important role to play in the coming months. Cedric's stomach performed a slow, queasy somersault. This was it. This was the suffocating fame he had been dreading, personified in a pink, smiling package. A role? I'm not sure I understand. I have my NEWTS to prepare for. Of course, of course. Your education is paramount, she said, waving a dismissive hand. But this is an opportunity that transcends mere academics. This is about public service. About providing reassurance. She paused, her pale eyes boring into him. As you can imagine, the conclusion of the Triwizard Tournament has left the public a little unsettled. Young Mr. Potter's version of events, while understandable given the boy's history of attracting drama, has been rather disruptive. All this talk of you-know-who returning, she gave a delicate shudder. It's simply not helpful. Cedric felt a prickle of defensiveness on Harry's behalf. He might not remember the graveyard, but he remembered the rest of the tournament. He remembered Harry warning him about the dragons, helping him with the egg. Harry wasn't a liar. But before he could formulate a response, Umbridge continued, her voice smooth as silk. What the wizarding world needs now is a steadying presence. A reliable voice. They need to hear from the other champion who was there. The one who kept his head. The one who can confirm that what happened was a tragic accident involving a deranged follower of the Dark Lord, certainly, but not his grand return. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. She was offering him a script. A pre-approved, ministry-stamped lie. I don't remember, Cedric blurted out, the admission tasting like ash in his mouth. The healers said the curse, it took my memory of it. Umbridge's smile didn't falter. If anything, it became more predatory. Ah, yes. A side effect of the trauma, they tell me. Perfectly understandable. But you don't need a perfect memory to know what is true, do you, Mr. Diggory? You are a sensible, level-headed young man. You know that the Dark Lord is gone. Minister Fudge has assured us of it. So whatever confusing images Mr. Potter might have conjured in his panic, they can't possibly be the objective truth, can they? She was twisting his own logic, his own Hufflepuff sense of fairness, into a weapon against the truth. He felt like he was sinking in quicksand. The minister would like to appoint you as a Ministry Junior Ambassador for Inter-School Cooperation, she said, the title sounding both grand and ridiculous. It would involve a few photo opportunities. A few carefully worded interviews for the Daily Prophet. Perhaps you could write a small piece for Which Weekly about the importance of school unity and not giving in to fear-mongering. It would be a wonderful start to a promising ministry career. Your father would be so proud. The mention of his father was a low blow, and she knew it. Amos Diggory was practically bursting with pride, telling anyone who would listen about his heroic son. To contradict the ministry's story would be to publicly humiliate him. I don't think I'm the right person, Cedric stammered, grabbing at the only defense he had left. I'm not a hero. I just got lucky. Nonsense, Umbridge chirped, her tone leaving no room for argument. Luck favors the prepared. The courageous. The public sees a hero, Mr. Diggory. And it is your duty not to disappoint them. We must all do our part for the greater good. She placed a crisp roll of parchment on the table between them. It was sealed with the official ministry crest. This is a preliminary agreement. Just a formality. It outlines your duties and, of course, the generous stipend the ministry is prepared to offer for your services. She rose to her feet, smoothing down her pink tweed skirt. I will leave you to look it over. I'll be in touch tomorrow to finalize the arrangements. It has been an absolute pleasure, Mr. Diggory. I know we are going to do great things together. With another one of her bloodless smiles, she turned and clicked her way out of the common room, leaving behind a profound silence and the lingering, sickly scent of lilies. Cedric stared at the parchment as if it were a venomous snake. He hadn't agreed to anything, yet he felt as though he had been shackled. Umbridge hadn't asked him, she had informed him. He was no longer Cedric Diggory, Hufflepuff student. He was a tool. A poster boy for a lie he couldn't even remember. And there was only one person in the entire world who could tell him if it truly was a lie. Finding Harry Potter alone was a challenge. He seemed to have mastered the art of being surrounded by people while projecting an aura of complete solitude. Cedric eventually tracked him down in the Ullery. The air in the circular stone room was thick with the scent of droppings and damp straw, and the soft, constant cooing of the owls was a mournful backdrop to the whistling wind outside. Harry was leaning against a windowsill, staring out at the darkening grounds. He didn't turn as Cedric's footsteps echoed on the stone floor. He looked thinner than Cedric remembered, and the set of his shoulders was tense, as if he were bracing for a blow. "Harry?" Harry flinched, spinning around. His green eyes were wary, guarded. For a moment, Cedric saw him not as a fellow student, but as a soldier who had seen something terrible. The easy camaraderie they had built during the tournament had vanished, replaced by a chasm of shared trauma that neither of them knew how to cross. "Cedric," Harry said. His voice was flat. "What do you want?" The bluntness was jarring, but Cedric deserved it. He'd been avoiding Harry, hiding from the one person who held the key to the blank space in his mind. "I need to talk to you," Cedric said, his own voice sounding hollow in the cavernous room. "It's important." Harry's expression hardened. "If you're here to tell me to change my story, the Ministry's already sent their owl. Save your breath." "No," Cedric said quickly. "No, it's not that. It's the opposite." He took a hesitant step closer. "A woman from the Ministry just visited me. Dolores Umbridge." A flicker of something, recognition, disgust, crossed Harry's face. "The one in pink? Looks like a toad?" "That's her," Cedric confirmed, a small, grim smile touching his lips. "She wants me to be a junior ambassador. She wants me to tell people you're wrong. That Voldemort isn't back." Harry let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "Of course she does. And you're going to do it, right? The great Cedric Diggory, hero of Hogwarts. Everyone believes you." The words stung, mostly because they were true. He had the credibility. He was the safe, sensible one. Harry was the volatile, troubled boy who lived to be a nuisance. "That's the thing, Harry," Cedric said, his voice dropping. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. "I don't know what to believe. Because I don't remember." Harry stared at him, his suspicion warring with confusion. "What are you talking about? You were there." "I know. But I can't see it," Cedric said, frustration making his voice raw. He pressed the heels of his hands to his temples, as if he could physically force the memory out. "I remember entering the maze. I remember the port key. And then, nothing. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital wing with my head feeling like it was going to explode. Madame Pomfrey said the curse that missed me, it scrambled things." He looked at Harry, his desperation laid bare. The golden boy mask was gone, leaving only a confused, terrified teenager. "Umbridge gave me their story. A neat, tidy story where a lone Death Eater killed Barty Crouch Jr. and tried to attack us. She wants me to tell that story. But I can't. Not unless I know. I have to know what really happened." He finally asked the question that had been haunting his waking moments and tormenting his dreamless nights. "Please, Harry. Tell me. What happened in the graveyard?" Harry was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the hooting of the owls and the rattling of the window frames. He studied Cedric's face, searching for any hint of deception. What he saw, apparently, was enough. He sighed, a weary, soul-deep sound, and turned back to the window. "It was a trap," Harry began, his voice low and raspy. "The portkey took us there. It was a graveyard. The Riddle family grave. He spoke in short, clipped sentences, as if the words were sharp stones he had to force out of his throat. He described the hooded figure of Wormtail, the giant cauldron, the grotesque, childlike form of Voldemort being lowered into it. He spoke of the ritual, bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. Cedric listened, his blood turning to ice. This wasn't a story. It was a nightmare. It was visceral, horrifying, and it felt nauseatingly true in a way Umbridge's sanitized report never could. He came back, Harry continued, his voice cracking. He was whole. Tall. Whiter than a skull, with red eyes. He called his Death Eaters. Malfoy's father was there. Cedric felt a jolt. Lucius Malfoy, a respected governor of the school. It was unthinkable. And then, Harry's breath hitched. He wouldn't look at Cedric. He kept his gaze fixed on the darkening Quidditch pitch in the distance. He wanted to duel me. To prove he was stronger. He told Wormtail, he told him to kill the spare. Kill the spare. The words hit Cedric with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand flying to his chest. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a champion. He was just in the way. An afterthought. A loose end to be tidied up. The spare. Wormtail raised his wand, Harry whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. He said the words. Avada Kedavra. I saw the green light. It was coming right at you. I tried to yell, to push you, but it was too late. Harry finally turned to face him, and his eyes were glistening. You fell. You just fell. I thought you were dead, Cedric. Everyone thinks you just got stunned, but I saw it. I saw him kill you. Cedric's head was spinning. He could almost feel it now, not a memory, but a phantom sensation. The chilling cold, the rush of absolute terror, the blinding green light that wasn't aimed at Harry, but at him. The story didn't make sense. If he was hit by the killing curse, he should be dead. But I'm not, Cedric breathed, the words a mix of confusion and dawning horror. How am I not dead? I don't know, Harry admitted, shaking his head. When our wands connected, when the echoes came out of his wand, your echo was there too. You asked me to take your body back to your father. Harry swallowed hard. Maybe the portkey activated a fraction of a second after the curse hit, maybe it interrupted it somehow? Maybe it hit your bag, or a button on your robes. I don't know. But I know what I saw. And I know Voldemort is back. The pieces slammed into place, jagged and brutal. The memory gap, the splitting headaches, the Ministry's desperate spin. They weren't celebrating his survival, they were exploiting his amnesia. He wasn't Cedric Diggory, the hero who lived too. He was Cedric Diggory, the boy who was inconveniently not quite dead. He looked from Harry's traumatized, honest face to the dark castle grounds outside. The Hufflepuff common room felt a million miles away. The quiet life he craved, the simple future of NEWTS and a respectable ministry job, had been incinerated by a flash of green light he couldn't even remember. Umbridge and the ministry didn't want a hero. They wanted a puppet, and they were handing him the strings. A sense of cold, quiet fury began to smolder in his chest, eclipsing the fear. They had tried to murder him, and now they were trying to steal his voice. He met Harry's gaze, a new resolve hardening his own. The awkwardness between them was still there, but it was now overlaid with something else, the grim understanding of two soldiers in the same trench. Okay, Cedric said, his voice steady for the first time since he'd woken up. Okay. She'll be in touch tomorrow, she said. To finalize the arrangements. Before Harry could respond, a tawny owl swooped through the window, landing gracefully on a perch near them. It wasn't a school owl. It carried a rolled-up copy of the Evening Prophet. It hooted softly and extended a leg towards Cedric. Puzzled, Cedric untied the paper. He unrolled it, his eyes scanning the front page. His blood ran cold. There, in bold, stark letters, was the headline. Diggory accepts ministry post. Harry Potter is a confused and disturbed boy, says brave champion, ****. Beneath it was a large, moving photograph of him from the Yule Ball, smiling handsomely, waving at the camera. And below that, a series of quotes attributed to him, quotes he had never said. Words about stability, about the dangers of fantasy, about his deep gratitude to Minister Fudge for his leadership in these trying times. Dolores Umbridge hadn't waited for his answer. She had never intended to. Cedric looked up from the paper, the lie printed in black and white for the entire wizarding world to see. He looked at Harry, whose face had gone pale with a mixture of fury and betrayal. The war hadn't started with a bang. It had started with a smiling, pink-clad woman and a newspaper headline. And he, Cedric Diggory, was now officially on the wrong side.
Chapter 3, The Treachery of Magical Ink. The scarlet engine of the Hogwarts Express was a screaming, soot-belching denial of the summer strangeness. For Cedric, the familiar journey north felt like a retreat, a desperate scramble back to the one place where the rules, at least, were supposed to make sense. He'd spent the last 2 months dodging his father's proud, booming pronouncements to neighbors, deflecting L's from the Daily Prophet with increasingly flimsy excuses, and staring at his own face on the front of a special edition of which weekly titled Britain's Most Dashingly Brave Bachelors. He'd used the magazine for kindling. He found an empty compartment near the back of the train, hoping the anonymity of the crowd would swallow him whole. No such luck. Within minutes, the door slid open to reveal a pair of breathless first-year Hufflepuffs, their eyes as wide and shiny as galleons. "You're him," one of them whispered, clutching a chocolate frog card of Dumbledore so tightly the wizard's head was starting to bend. Cedric managed a smile that felt like it was cracking his face. "I'm Cedric." "Cedric Diggory," the other one breathed, as if confirming a rare sighting. "You fought you-know-who." The words landed like stones in his gut. "I was there," he corrected, his voice quieter than he intended. It was the careful, ministry-approved phrasing he'd been coached to use. Not a lie, but a hollowed-out version of the truth. They stared, waiting for more. For a story. For the gory, glorious details of his heroism. He had none to give. The 5 minutes in the graveyard remained a black, gaping hole in his memory, a void he was both terrified of and desperate to fill. All he had were phantom pains in his head and a bone-deep certainty that the title of hero was a stolen coat, 3 sizes too big and itchy in all the wrong places. It was, mostly Harry, he finally mumbled, looking out the window at the blur of green countryside. He's the one you should be impressed with. The first years exchanged a look of profound disappointment and, after a moment of awkward silence, shuffled away. Cedric slumped back against the worn velvet seat, the relief of their absence immediately replaced by a fresh wave of shame. He was pushing his unearned glory onto Harry, the one person who knew the truth and was paying the price for it. The papers were calling Potter unstable, a troubled attention seeker. And Cedric, the ministry's golden boy, was the handsome, reliable brick they used to wall up his story. The rest of the journey passed in a similar state of polite, agonizing celebrity. He signed an autograph on a crumpled piece of parchment for a Ravenclaw 3rd year, patiently explained to a Gryffindor that no, his hair hadn't been singed by dark magic, and accepted a box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans from a gaggle of girls who dissolved into giggles the moment he said, "Thank you." With every interaction, the imposter syndrome clawed a little deeper. He felt like a well-dressed ghost, haunting the memory of a boy who had actually earned this admiration. The real horror began at Hogsmeade Station. As the students disembarked into the cool evening air, a series of bright, magical flashes illuminated the platform. There, lining the path to the horseless carriages, were posters. Dozens of them. They were full color, magically animated, and featured a version of himself that Cedric didn't recognize. This Cedric was magnificent. His jaw was set in a determined line, his Hufflepuff robes billowed heroically in an unfelt wind, and his wand was raised, emitting a shower of golden sparks. In the background, looking small and distinctly grateful, was a smudged figure with messy black hair and round glasses. Above it all, in bold, reassuring script, were the words, "Hogwarts is safe. The Ministry is vigilant. Our champions are our shield." Cedric stopped dead, his luggage clattering to the ground. His stomach churned. The Cedric on the poster winked, a confident, charming gesture that made him want to be sick. A sickeningly sweet voice chirped from beside him. "Aren't they just wonderful, Mr. Diggory?" Dolores Umbridge stood there, a vision in flamingo pink tweed. Her smile was a wide, predatory curve, and her eyes, large and bulging, fixed on him with an unnerving intensity. "They capture your strength so perfectly," she continued, clasping her hands before her. A reassuring presence for the students in these trying times of rumor and misinformation. Cedric couldn't tear his eyes from the poster. They had made Harry look like a sidekick. A footnote in Cedric's own fabricated story. I didn't approve this," he stammered, feeling a hot flush of anger, a rare and unwelcome sensation. "Oh, the minister himself approved them, dear boy." Umbridge trilled, patting his arm with a hand that felt oddly cold despite its pudgy appearance. "It's a vital part of our all-is-well initiative. You are the face of resilience. The face of calm. Now, run along to the carriages. You have an important role to play at the feast." He watched her toddle away, her stubby legs carrying her towards the castle with an air of absolute authority. The anger in his chest was quickly being replaced by a familiar sense of helpless dread. He wasn't a person to her, he was a tool. A walking, talking propaganda poster. He scanned the crowded platform, his eyes searching for the smudged figure from the poster. He spotted Harry near a carriage, flanked by Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. Harry's face was pale, his shoulders hunched as he stared at the winking image of Cedric. Their eyes met across the sea of students. There was no anger in Harry's gaze, just a deep, weary hurt that felt 1,000 times worse. Cedric looked away, his own shame a physical weight. The great hall was a cacophony of reunion and excitement, but for Cedric, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear, star-dusted sky felt like a lie. The whole room felt like a lie. More of Umbridge's posters were plastered on the walls, their magical animations creating a dizzying loop of his own counterfeit bravery. He sat at the Hufflepuff table, picking at a bread roll, trying to ignore the admiring glances and whispered comments. He had to do something. This wasn't just about his own discomfort anymore. This was about Harry. It was about the truth, or the black hole where the truth should be. His Hufflepuff nature, the part of him that craved fairness and recoiled from injustice, was finally screaming louder than his desire to be left alone. He waited until after the sorting, while Professor Dumbledore was giving his start-of-term notices. The headmaster's eyes, usually twinkling, seemed shadowed with concern. When he introduced Professor Umbridge as the new defense against the dark arts teacher, a wave of confused murmuring swept the hall. Umbridge, appointed by the ministry. Cedric felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. She wasn't just visiting, she was an occupying force. Her speech was a masterpiece of condescending nonsense, full of words like progress, standards, and ministry-approved curriculum, all delivered in that high-pitched, girlish voice. As she spoke, she gestured towards one of the posters of Cedric, her smile widening. "We must take comfort in the knowledge that true, ministry-verified heroes walk among us, providing a fine example of courage and stability." That was it. He couldn't sit there and be her prop. Excusing himself from the Hufflepuff table with a mumbled, "Need some air," he slipped out of the great hall. He didn't go for air. He went to the greenhouses. He found Harry near the venomous tentacula beds, jabbing at the soil with the toe of his shoe. Ron and Hermione were with him, speaking in low, urgent tones. They fell silent as Cedric approached. The air thickened with awkwardness. "Harry," Cedric began, his voice sounding flimsy in the humid, earthy-smelling air. Ron Weasley crossed his arms, his expression openly hostile. "Come for another photo op?" "Ron," Hermione hissed, elbowing him. "No," Cedric said, his gaze fixed on Harry. "I came to apologize. For those things. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the castle. The posters. I swear, I had no idea she was going to do that. To make it look like, he trailed off, unable to voice the full injustice of it. Harry looked up, his green eyes guarded. It's not your fault. But it's my face, Cedric insisted, a frantic edge to his voice. She's using my face to call you a liar. And I can't. I won't be a part of that. A flicker of something, surprise? Interest, crossed Harry's face. Hermione was watching Cedric with a new, analytical intensity. What are you going to do? Harry asked, his tone flat. Tell the minister you don't want to be a hero anymore? I don't know, Cedric admitted, running a hand through his hair. The honesty of the admission seemed to deflate some of the tension. But I can't just let them hang there. They're enchanted. Strong informational charms, layered with a variant of the protean charm to keep them fresh and eye-catching. Hermione's eyebrows shot up. How do you know that? Cedric shrugged, a bit of his old, easy confidence surfacing. Charms is my best subject. And my uncle works in the improper use of magic office. He complains about rogue informational charms all the time. The ministry ones use a specific magical signature, a sort of key. If you know the key, you can piggyback on the enchantment. The three Gryffindors stared at him. Piggyback? Ron repeated, looking utterly lost. You mean, you could change them? Hermione asked, her eyes lighting up with academic fervor. Theoretically, Cedric said, his mind racing, the plan solidifying as he spoke. The charm is designed to be updated from a central source, Umbridge, probably. But a powerful, localized counter-application could override the original signal. It would be complex. It would require perfect timing and, for it to affect all the posters in the Great Hall at once, it would probably need two casters working in sync from different points in the room. He looked directly at Harry. A caster on one side of the hall, and a caster on the other. The unspoken offer hung in the air, thick as pollen. This was it. This was the Hufflepuff tactic. Not a duel, not a public denouncement, but a quiet, clever piece of magical sabotage. It was using the ministry's own tools against them. Harry was silent for a long moment, studying Cedric's face. He seemed to be looking for the catch, the angle. He found none. There was only Cedric's desperate sincerity. What would we change them to? Harry asked quietly. Something simple, Cedric said. Something true. He thought for a moment. Declaring Voldemort's return would just get them expelled. But they could undermine the lie. We change the text. Instead of all that nonsense about shields and champions, it just says one thing. A question. He took a deep breath. It'll say, what really happened in the graveyard? Hermione gasped. Ron's jaw dropped. It was perfect. It didn't accuse. It didn't make a statement they couldn't prove. It simply planted a seed of doubt, using the ministry's own smiling, heroic portrait to do it. It turned their weapon of reassurance into a weapon of inquiry. Harry's expression hardened into one of grim determination. He gave a sharp, decisive nod. All right. Let's do it. The opportunity came 3 days later, during the welcome back and ministry appreciation gathering Umbridge had organized for a Saturday evening. Attendance was mandatory. The Great Hall was even more nauseating than before. Pink bunting was draped between the floating candles, and a truly enormous banner of Minister Fudge hung behind the staff table, enchanted to give a reassuring wink every few minutes. Cedric sat at the Hufflepuff table, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He had a clear line of sight to Harry, who was sitting stiffly at the Gryffindor table, occasionally glancing over. They had spent the last 2 nights in the library, hidden in the charms section, whispering incantations and practicing the complex wand movements on a pair of enchanted quills until they could synchronize the spell with just a nod. Umbridge took to the lectern, which was now adorned with a fluffy pink bough. Her speech was even more saccharine and menacing than the one at the welcome feast. It is a time for unity, she cooed, her eyes sweeping the room. Unity of purpose, under the benevolent and watchful guidance of the Ministry of Magic. A time to discard childish stories. Her gaze lingered on Harry for a fraction of a second too long. And a time to celebrate our true heroes. She gestured grandly to the poster nearest her. The animated Cedric gave a particularly dashing smile. Mr. Cedric Diggory stands as a testament to the strength and character fostered here at Hogwarts, strength the ministry is so keen to encourage. This was their cue. Cedric's hand tightened around his wand under the table. He felt sick with nerves, but also a strange, exhilarating clarity. He was done being a prop. He caught Harry's eye. Harry gave the barest of nods. Cedric took a steadying breath, his gaze fixed on the gleaming, perfect face of his poster self. He remembered the feeling of the portkey, the dizzying lurch in his stomach, the cold dread of the graveyard air. He remembered pain. Confusion. And most of all, he remembered the absolute certainty that he was not the hero on that wall. He began to mutter the complex incantation under his breath, the Latin words of familiar comfort on his tongue. Asterisk mutationem scriptura. Echo resonare, asterisk. Across the hall, Harry was doing the same. A faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, a low thrum of magic building. Cedric could feel the energy of Harry's spell connecting with his own, a strange, invisible thread stretching between the Hufflepuff and Gryffindor tables. For a moment, nothing happened. Umbridge continued to drone on about ministry educational decrees. A few students were starting to fidget. Then, it began. A flicker. On the poster beside Umbridge, the heroic text shimmered, like a heat haze rising from summer asphalt. The golden words "Our champions are our shield" wavered, broke apart, and reformed. The student next to Cedric, a fourth-year named Hannah Abbott, gasped. "Cedric, look." He looked. Where the ministry's slogan had been, there was now a single, stark question, written in the same bold, official script. What really happened in the graveyard? A ripple of whispers started near the staff table and spread like fire through the great hall. Heads turned. On the other side of the room, another poster changed. And another. All at once, every single poster in the hall, dozens of them, flickered and reset. The heroic, winking image of Cedric Diggory remained, but now his confident smile seemed to be asking the most inconvenient question in the wizarding world. The hall erupted. It wasn't loud shouting, but a massive, sibilant wave of whispering, pointing, and confused murmuring. The intended message of safety and control had been perfectly, flawlessly inverted into a public declaration of doubt. Dolores Umbridge stopped mid-sentence. Her wide, doughy face, which had been wreathed in a self-satisfied smile, slowly froze. The smile didn't vanish, it seemed to curdle. Her head turned, her bulging eyes moving from one poster to the next, a slow, disbelieving horror dawning on her features. The hall was filled with the sound of hundreds of students all asking the same question the posters now posed. Cedric kept his face carefully neutral, his wand now safely back in his pocket. He chanced a look at Dumbledore. The headmaster was examining a nearby poster with an expression of mild, academic curiosity, but behind his half-moon spectacles, his eyes were dancing with a light so bright it was almost a laugh. Then, Umbridge's gaze, cold and furious, swept the room. It passed over the Slytherin table, the Ravenclaws, the Hufflepuffs. For a terrifying second, her eyes locked with Cedric's. There was no proof. No way she could know. But in that moment, he saw an expression of pure, undiluted malice, a silent promise that this was not over. Her gaze moved on, landing on Harry Potter. The two people in the room she suspected most, now linked by a single, public act of defiance. Cedric's heart was still hammering, but the fear was mixed with something else. A small, unfamiliar spark of pride. He looked across the hall and met Harry's eyes one more time. Harry's face was grim, but he gave Cedric another small, almost imperceptible nod. It was no longer just a signal. It was an acknowledgement. They weren't friends. They were barely allies. But in the silent, cold war against the ministry's comfortable lies, they had just fired the first shot. And Cedric Diggory, the boy who just wanted to be left alone, was finally in the fight. Chapter 4. The air in the antechamber of courtroom 10 was thick enough to chew. It tasted of old parchment, floor polish, and the cloying, rosewater scent that clung to Dolores Umbridge like a second skin. Cedric stood stiffly in his new dress robes, a somber, ministry-approved charcoal gray that felt less like clothing and more like a shroud for his reputation. Every few seconds, a pop and a flash of green-tinged light would erupt from the hallway as a photographer from the Daily Prophet tried to get a candid shot through the cracked-open door. Each flash made him flinch. "Chin up, Cedric, dear," Umbridge chirped, her voice a weapon wrapped in spun sugar. She reached out and adjusted the fall of his collar with pudgy, ring-laden fingers. Her touch was cold. "You look the very picture of quiet dignity. The Wisengamot will be so impressed." Cedric offered a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "Thank you, Madame Umbridge." He had spent the last 2 weeks being managed. It began with polite requests for interviews, which he politely declined. It escalated to ministry owls arriving every morning with suggested talking points. Yesterday, it had culminated in a 3-hour preparatory session with Umbridge herself, where she'd handed him a roll of parchment. It was a speech. His speech, apparently. A beautifully scripted, entirely fictional account of courage, clarity, and unwavering faith in the Ministry of Magic. He was meant to deliver it today at this special commendation hearing. His stomach churned. He felt like a prize goose being fattened for a feast he had no desire to attend. The antechamber door creaked open again, and Harry Potter slipped inside, followed by the imposing figure of Albus Dumbledore. The atmosphere instantly shifted, the cloying sweetness curdling in the presence of their raw, unmanaged truth. Harry's eyes, red-rimmed and shadowed, found Cedric's. The familiar wave of profound awkwardness washed over Cedric. Here was the only other person on the planet who knew the gaping hole in Cedric's story, and all they could ever do was stare at each other across an impassable gulf of memory. "Harry, my boy," Dumbledore said, his voice a calm and pleasant rumble. He nodded towards Cedric. "Cedric. A trying day for you both, I am sure." Umbridge's smile tightened until it was a bloodless pink line. "Headmaster. We are quite busy here. Mr. Diggory requires focus before his commendation." The implication was clear: your chaotic, truth-telling presence is not welcome. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, utterly unperturbed. "Of course, Dolores. We would not wish to distract him from his duties." Harry ignored them all. He walked directly up to Cedric, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his own ill-fitting dress robes. He looked younger than 15, and simultaneously 100 years old. "They're going to ask you questions," Harry said, his voice low and urgent. "They'll twist it. They'll make it sound like I'm lying." Cedric's throat felt tight. He looked from Harry's desperate face to the parchment scroll clutched in his own hand. Umbridge's words were a comforting poison. Harry's were a jagged, painful antidote. "I know," Cedric managed. You don't have to lie," Harry pressed on. "You can just say you don't remember. That's the truth, isn't it? Hem star dot." The soft, faux-polite cough from Umbridge was louder than a shout. She was now standing so close to Cedric he could feel the static from her pink cardigan. "Mr. Potter, I must insist you do not upset the recipient of this great honor. Cedric knows perfectly well what is required of him. He is a sensible, cooperative young man." She made cooperative sound like the highest virtue a wizard could possess. She made it sound like an order. A bell chimed, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the stone floor. "That's our cue," Umbridge trilled, her good cheer restored. She patted Cedric's arm. "Break a leg, dear. But not literally, of course. The photographers would have a field day." She bustled out, leaving Cedric alone with Harry and Dumbledore. Dumbledore's gaze was gentle but penetrating. "Courage comes in many forms, Cedric," he said softly. "Sometimes it is the sword, and sometimes it is the shield. And sometimes it is simply a voice, saying what is true, however quietly." Cedric swallowed, the scripted lies on the parchment feeling heavier than a bag of galleons. He looked at Harry. "I'm sorry," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was apologizing for. For surviving? For not remembering? For being the Ministry's shiny, convenient alternative to Harry's horrifying truth? Harry just shook his head, a look of grim resignation on his face. "Just don't let them use you, Diggory." Then he too was gone, following Dumbledore into the cavernous courtroom. Cedric took one last, deep breath, the scent of rosewater and lies filling his lungs, and followed. Courtroom 10 was a terrifying pit of dark wood and tiered benches, rising on all sides like the maw of some great beast. Every seat on the Wizengamot benches was filled with a witch or wizard in plum-colored robes, their faces ranging from stern to bored to openly curious. Below them, the press gallery was a writhing mass of reporters, their quick quotes quills poised over notebooks like venomous snakes ready to strike. The air crackled with suppressed magic and the blinding, intermittent flashes of cameras. Cedric was guided to a single, imposing chair in the center of the sunken floor. It was hard and cold. He felt pinned, a butterfly on a board. Harry was seated off to the side, almost an afterthought, next to Dumbledore. In the front row of the public gallery, he saw a small contingent of Hufflepuffs, Ernie Macmillan, Hannah Abbott, and Susan Bones, who had somehow gotten tickets. They gave him wan, supportive smiles that only made him feel worse. At the highest point of the tiered benches sat Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic. And right beside him, beaming like a proud mother, was Dolores Umbridge. Fudge cleared his throat, a pompous, rumbling sound. "We are gathered here today for a most important, if somber, occasion," he began, his voice magically amplified to fill the chamber. "To officially close the inquiry into the tragic conclusion of the Triwizard Tournament, and to honor a true hero of the wizarding world." He gestured dramatically towards Cedric. A smattering of polite, official-sounding applause echoed in the chamber. Cedric felt his ears burn. "For months, we have been subjected to unsettling rumors," Fudge continued, his tone shifting to one of paternalistic concern. "Whispers of darkness returning, tales designed to stir up panic and fear. These stories, as our extensive investigations have shown, are the product of a traumatized young man's confusion." He nodded sympathetically towards Harry, who stiffened in his seat. Understandable, of course, after such an ordeal. But ultimately, unfounded. Cedric watched, mesmerized by the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all. Fudge was painting a masterpiece of denial, and Cedric was meant to be the final, triumphant brushstroke. "But we are fortunate," Fudge boomed, his voice swelling with manufactured pride. "For we have another witness. A champion who stood firm in the face of danger. A student of unimpeachable character, whose clear-headed testimony has been invaluable in setting the record straight. A young man who not only survived a terrible magical accident but did so with the sort of bravery we expect from our very best. I speak, of course, of Mr. Cedric Diggory." More applause, this time louder. Cedric felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. He could feel the weight of Umbridge's stare, willing him to play his part. He clutched the parchment in his sweaty palm. It was his escape route. Just read the words, accept the medal, smile for the cameras, and he could go back to his life. A quiet life. A comfortable life. A lie. "Mr. Diggory," Fudge said, his voice softening. "Would you please approach the lectern? We would all be honored to hear your account. To hear, in your own words, how you faced down the confusion of that night and emerged a hero." Cedric's legs felt like lead as he stood. He walked the few paces to the ornate wooden lectern, the sound of his own footsteps unnaturally loud in the silent room. He unrolled the parchment. The words, in Umbridge's neat, looping script, blurred before his eyes. Asterisk Minister, members of the Wizengamot, esteemed guests. It is with a heavy heart, but a clear mind, that I stand before you today, asterisk. He gripped the edges of the lectern. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He glanced up. He saw Fudge's smug, expectant face. He saw Umbridge Saccharin, encouraging smile. He saw Dumbledore, his expression unreadable but for the faint, unwavering light in his blue eyes. And then he saw Harry. Harry wasn't looking at him with anger, or pity, or even accusation. He was just looking at him with the hollowed-out emptiness of someone who has seen something unforgivable and is now utterly alone with it. The loneliness in Harry's eyes was a physical thing, a shard of ice in Cedric's gut. A quiet life, the thought was a siren's call. He could have it. All he had to do was read the words. Be the golden boy, the hero, just one more time. I remember the events in the graveyard with perfect clarity, the script read. He opened his mouth. The first word was meant to be minister. But it didn't come out. His throat was a desert. He coughed, a dry, rasping sound. Umbridge gave her little cough. Asterisk hem. Asterisk a gentle reminder. A command. Cedric looked back down at the parchment. The lies felt slick and oily under his fingers. He saw the flash of green light in his mind, not a memory, but the phantom limb of one. He saw the cold, hard ground rushing up to meet him. He saw the blank space where 5 minutes of his life used to be. True Hufflepuff courage isn't about dying a hero, but about living with inconvenient truths. He didn't know where the thought came from. Perhaps it was something Professor Sprout had said once, or maybe it was just the last, desperate gasp of his own conscience. He took a deep breath. And he began to speak. Minister, he started, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again, the sound wavering but clear. Members of the Wisengamot. I can't. A confused murmur rippled through the courtroom. Fudge's smile faltered. Umbridge's head tilted, her expression freezing over. I can't read this, Cedric said, lifting the parchment an inch off the lectern before letting it fall back. His voice was gaining strength, fueled by a terrifying, liberating wave of honesty. Because it isn't true. None of it is. The murmur grew into a buzz. Quill started scratching furiously. You're calling me a hero, Cedric said, his eyes scanning the sea of faces, finally landing back on Fudge. You want to give me a medal for bravery. But I wasn't brave. I don't know what I was. Because I don't remember. He let the words hang in the air. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by a single, sharp intake of breath from Umbridge's seat. There's a gap, Cedric continued, stumbling over the words, embracing the clumsiness of the truth instead of the elegance of the lie. I remember the maze. I remember grabbing the cup with Harry. And then? I remember waking up in the hospital wing. There are about 5 minutes in between that are just gone. A complete blank. He looked directly at Harry now. The ministry's report says I dueled bravely. It says I helped Harry fight off whatever was there. It says I can confirm Harry was confused, that he was mistaken about Voldemort. He said the name, and a collective gasp went through the room. Fudge flinched as if he'd been struck. But I can't confirm any of that, Cedric said, his voice ringing with a conviction he hadn't felt in months. I can't corroborate anything. And I won't stand here and pretend that I can. To do that would be an insult to what happened. To whatever truth I've forgotten. He felt a strange lightness spreading through his chest. The imposter was vanishing, replaced by something much simpler and much more frightening, himself. Just Cedric. The boy who didn't know. I am not a hero, he said, the words simple, direct, and undeniable. He pushed the parchment with Umbridge's speech off the lectern. It fluttered to the stone floor like a dead leaf. I'm the lucky one. I'm the one who doesn't have to remember. The only person in this room who knows for certain what happened in that graveyard is Harry Potter. He turned and looked at Harry, whose eyes were wide with disbelief and something that looked terrifyingly like gratitude. And I believe him, Cedric finished, his voice quiet, but it carried to every corner of the silent, stunned courtroom. For a moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, chaos erupted. Fudge shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is an outrage. He's been coerced. Dumbledore has put him up to this. Umbridge was no longer smiling. Her face was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. Her eyes, narrowed to little piggish slits, were fixed on Cedric, and they promised a reckoning. The press gallery exploded into a frenzy of flashing bulbs and shouting reporters. But then, another sound cut through the din. It started in the public gallery. A slow, steady, rhythmic clapping. Clap, clap, clap. Cedric looked up. It was Ernie Macmillan. He was on his feet, his face grimly determined, applauding. Then Hannah Abbott stood, and Susan Bones beside her. They were all clapping, their eyes fixed on Cedric. It wasn't the thunderous applause of a cheering crowd. It was measured, deliberate. A statement. It was Hufflepuff loyalty, solid and unshowy and utterly immovable. The sound was infectious. A few rows back, another student stood, one of the Weasley twins, Cedric thought, and joined in. Then another. Soon, a quarter of the gallery was standing, their steady applause a quiet rebellion against the minister's sputtering rage. It wasn't a revolution. It was something far more dangerous to the ministry, a visible crack in their perfectly constructed narrative. In the confusion, Dumbledore was suddenly at his side. I believe this hearing is concluded, he said, his voice calm amidst the storm. He placed a hand on Cedric's shoulder and another on Harry's. Come, boys. Time to go. He guided them towards a side exit, away from the furious minister and the ravenous press. As they reached the door, Cedric dared to glance back. His eyes met Umbridge's. The cloying sweetness was gone, burned away. What remained was pure, undiluted malice. Her gaze was a physical thing, a promise that this was not over. That for his inconvenient, clumsy honesty, he had not earned a quiet life, but a powerful, relentless enemy. The heavy door boomed shut behind them, muffling the sounds of chaos. Cedric stood in the quiet corridor, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. He had walked into that courtroom a puppet, a poster boy, a lie. He was walking out a target. And for the first time since he'd woken up in the hospital wing, he finally felt like himself.